Hi all, welcome to the FIDE World Chess Championship 2024. This is round 7, Gukesh against Ding Liren. We have knight f3, d5, g3, g6, so both sides fianchettoing their bishops, and white's putting pressure on d5. We have c6, bishop g2, knight f6, both sides castle, and now rook e1. This is an interesting kind of pawn sacrifice. It's accepted here. So this does seem one of the better moves to accept it. e4, bishop g4. An option, it seems, is knight a6 here, to play knight a6. If knight a3, black is able to play b5. After knight c2, knight c7, white could play the dynamic looking b3. And here c takes, a takes. This position should be about even. White has some interesting dynamic play going on. It's an interesting kind of positional gambit. But bishop g4 is played instead of knight a6. We have knight bd2 and now c5. So striking at white's dark square control. If b5, we can consider b3 here, but actually h3, b3 might not be so good as h3 here, bishop c8, a3, in fact, and actually this position after e5, this would be a good move for black to try and destabilize white's center. If knight takes e5, queen takes d4, knight e to f3, and black's actually getting a small edge there. b5 does seem quite an interesting move, actually. Yeah, there are some interesting options here for black. So yeah, just to recap here, h3, the bishop doesn't have to take on f3, and black has this move e5 here. And you might ask, what about knight d to f3? Then black just takes on d1 and takes on e4. So in a nutshell, b5 does seem a viable alternative to c5. So after c5, white gets a potential pass pawn in the center. d5, we have e6, h3, keeping that potential for a pass pawn. If d takes, bishop takes, this position is just even. It's just going to be even. Black can throw in this check here and then bishop d7. Okay, so that's about even. So h3 collects the bishop pair, which isn't so significant right now. The light square bishop is going to be hemmed in by the pawn on d5. So e takes, knight bd7. So in general, black wants to blockade this pawn with a blockading knight. Nimzovich, my system. But in this particular position, for the moment, knight bd7, we have knight takes c4, and black actually has an ambition, sometimes with this pawn majority on the queen side. So knight a3, queen b6, bishop f4, rook f to e8, queen d2, rook a to d8, knight c2, knight f8. And now white plays to fix these pawns b4. We have c4, bishop e3, and now queen a6, bishop d4. So it seems white's positional advantage is here, getting that d4 square for a piece. Okay, so in this position, we have rook takes e1 check, rook takes e1, and now queen takes a2. If rook e8, well, black can't play knight takes because we're just going to take on g7 and then take on d5, winning material. So queen takes a2 is played, but rook e8 is worth checking out for a moment. a3, rook takes e1, queen takes e1, queen a4. This should lead to an even position. Queen b3 should actually mean it kind of simplifies after knight takes d5, hitting the d4 bishop. And there's a very funny line here actually, bishop takes g7, Actually, not so funny here. King takes g7, knight takes b3. Not here. This is just an even position. I guess you could call bishop takes d5 a funny line, b2, where the pawn queens. If knight c2, the pawn queens. So, but yeah, knight takes b3 is even. So rook e8 does seem like a way of being equal here. But queen takes a2 is played. We have rook a1, and the engines suggest here that c3 is important. Ding Liren played queen b3, which got quite a few kibitzers excited. So c3 does pose white some issues. If bishop takes c3, queen c4 would be the key points. The queen's quite nice on c4. Bishop takes, rook takes a7, bishop c3. And this is interesting and complex. Queen g5 hits the rook. Rook d7 hits white's rook. Rook a8 pins the knight. Bishop takes b4 protects that pinned knight. And it leads to a situation knight takes, queen takes, rook b8, which is about even. So c3 does have a lot going for it, it seems. If rook takes a2, then black's playing for a small edge. C takes d2. Bishop c3, black could queen this pawn, then play knight takes d5. This is a funny line. I feel knight takes d5 is a funny line. After bishop takes g7, guess what? Black can play here, which is really quite cool. Yeah, black can actually forget taking the bishop. Black can play knight takes b4, threatening rook takes d1 check, as well as the rook. If rook a1, knight takes c2, and here that's hitting the rook. So bishop takes, this is just a small edge for black. If anyone's got an edge, black has the an extra pawn here for the moment. So white can take on a7 though, and then the rook can be active. It's just slightly better for black. In fact, you know, black is a pawn up anyway. But here, for example, there's bishop b3. Okay, the rook could go back to defend f7. Black's slightly better anyway. The evaluation here, black has a small edge, the evaluation. So, yeah, c3 does seem as though it was a nuisance move not picked up by Ding Liren. So this was the first sign of disappointment from kibitzers in this game. Oh, why isn't this played? Okay, and I mentioned bishop takes f6. If a move like h4, knight e4 would be just to show the threats black has. Why commit to bishop takes f6? This is just to show the threat black has. Can you see what black plays? Yeah, knight e4 would be a winning position for black, because then bishop takes c3, winning the exchange there. So anyway, Ding Liren played queen b3, getting some kibitzers excited. We have rook a3, which is a very precise move. Queen b3 does hit the bishop. The bishop is an unprotected piece on f3, and this move, rook a3, protects the bishop, and the rook really wants to go to a5. Yeah, so if it went to a5 immediately, there's no backfire here. Black just takes the bishop. So rook a3, and now the king comes to support f3, which could be useful anyway. Rook d7. If knight 6 to d7, rook takes, bishop takes, knight takes. White does have a significant advantage here. It looks pretty comfortable. There's things like knight c6. These pawns are fragile. It's nice for white. So rook d7, we have rook a5. This is a difficult position, it seemed, for black. We have queen b3. If a6, yeah, white can just take on a6. Knight takes d5. White can take on g7. And let's say knight c7 hitting the queen, hitting the rook. Queen h6. This is a crazy line. Knight f to e6. rook b6, knight takes g7. This is an absolutely crazy line. Queen e3, king g7, bishop c6. We can see some issues in black's position, but yeah, check. Yeah, we'd have to actually play super accurately to see any advantage. The bishop does control h1 here. Knight e3. Yeah, this is a long way off. But basically, this is just a fictional scenario now. h4, queen c5, and king h3 would give white advantage. Anything else? No. King h3 gives white advantage. If queen takes e3, check, taking on b5, and this would be a winning position for white. Okay, yeah, and white can carry on from there. That's total, crazy line, this a6. So what happened here? Knight takes d5. With this interesting idea of knight c7, it's a crazy line. But anyway, and another alternative, rook b7, there's just d6 hitting that rook. Rook d7, bishop c5, and white should be significantly better here, and that's a clearer line to evaluate and to play through. Much clearer. White's got that nice passed pawn with the bishop here. Clear advantage for white. So anyway, queen b3 though was played. Rook a3, as though there's going to be a repetition. It's probably just to get to a time control quicker. And now going back to a5, queen b3. Now rook takes b5. Queen d3, and here queen f4 was played, which is a slight inaccuracy from an engine perspective. Bishop e3 seems to be the most accurate. So the idea, queen takes, bishop takes, if rook d8, bishop f4, and there's a danger of bishop c7 with d6. So let's say rook d7, then rook a5, and this is a backward pawn on a semi-open file. This seems to be in white's control, this position with that a7 target. And say it drops here, this should be a road to victory. It should be. I mean, it does seem like a road to victory, that white should be able to consolidate in this scenario. It doesn't seem that crazy, the variations. So white is a pawn up here. It does seem quite promising. So bishop e3. If queen f5, then rook a5, and again white's got lots of options here which seem quite nice. If queen takes d3, was played, c takes, knight a3, d2, and after bishop takes, yeah, this is troublesome for white with that pawn on d2, as you might expect. If bishop e3, knight takes d5, and the bishop, black wants to deflect to be able to queen, so we can't afford bishop takes because of the queening. If bishop takes d2, this is just an even position. So queen takes d3 wouldn't give white anything in this line. It wouldn't give white after d2 anything. So bishop takes f6, bishop takes, knight c4 is also an even position after bishop c3. It does seem as though there's enough for black to keep the balance. Both sides have a passed d pawn here, blockaded. So anyway, queen f4 though does seem an inaccuracy compared to bishop e3. Now that there is really, I describe this as an engine accurate move that wasn't played, funny enough. Queen takes was played. The engine accurate move, can you guess what it is? Yeah, it's g5. It vacates g6, which can be useful sometimes. So h6 first. White is threatening here, bishop takes f6, so h6 first, and then queen c1. If queen f4, the point would be knight g6. Then the pressure is relieved in some way, check. The king can go to h7. And if white has an edge, it's only a small edge. This position, it's only a small edge. But, yeah, there's a game from here. in theory, this position here is a small edge, but there's plenty of opportunities here for everyone to go wrong. So anyway, yeah, queen c1 in this line, c3 is kind of interesting. Rook c5, knight takes d5, bishop takes g7, king takes, queen e1, knight g6, and let's take bishop takes, rook takes c3. White does have an advantage in theory. So sometimes, yeah, the move g5 doesn't really do that much for black. It does seem it might be more accurate than the game. Queen takes c2. So we have bishop takes f6, queen f5. So this is a dynamic pawn structure that's emerging. If bishop takes f6, queen takes, queen f5 here, queen d4, this is nice for white, big advantage. So queen f5 immediately, though different, slightly. Queen takes, g takes, bishop takes g7, king takes, rook c5, knight g6, rook takes c4, now knight e5. So white's a pawn up, but black has this forcing move knight c6, hitting the rook, hitting b4. The rook stays protecting b4. If d takes c6, yeah, that just loses the exchange. The rook's going to get behind the pawn and black's going to have a big advantage. So rook f4, we have knight e7, b5, king f6, rook d4, h6. If knight c8 here, bishop e2, knight d6, yeah, white's edge is very limited. Also knight b6, white's edge is very limited here. So anyway, h6. What would be a slight concern is king e5, because then rook h4. And here, taking out the h7 pawn, this endgame for white seems promising as a rook and pawn ending potentially goes. In this rook and pawn ending, it looks promising for white. Here, h5, h6. And this is just fiction now. g4 is possible here. Because if rook takes, there's g5 check winning the rook. And so it is an advantage, this position. White builds up a big advantage here. But that's just fiction. So king e5, that fictional approach, would seem very promising for white. But h6 was played. And it seems this whole king e5 idea has gone away. But actually it crops up here. This is, for me, rather sad point of the game, because I'm a fan of Nimzovich. I thought just the blockade. I just thought knight c8 to d6 is a nice blockade, and it's also, you know, one of the top engine moves. Just knight c8, just it looks like a nice Nimzovich blockade when the opponent has a pass pawn. The knight's Nimzovich's favourite blockader. I thought this would be it, giving a nod to Nimzovich. This position, it shouldn't be too much to worry about. Knight takes b5 as example here, and there shouldn't be too much to worry about. King takes, rook takes. You know, this is an example where it should be about even. So yes, knight c8. If instead of rook a4, king e3, knight takes b5. Again, there shouldn't be too much for black to worry about. So anyway, but this king e5 crops up again with this h6 now being attacked. So this is in the main line of the game now. Knight takes, rook takes h6, knight c3, rook c6, knight e4. But now, yeah, to actually see the positive evaluation of Stockfish, you need to actually be Stockfish, because you need to have calculated all the millions of variations. Yeah, so it's understandable that an inaccuracy creeps into human play, king e1. So what was the way, if this was a big evaluation advantage in theory, according to Stockfish, what was the way instead of this king e1? If rook a6, there is pressure on the black position. Let's say knight c5, rook a2. Let's take this position, bishop c6. We do have a passed pawn, and here we do seem to be in control over the position. The rook might sometimes be better than the knight. It should be a big advantage, but is it that easy to convert? Not necessarily. And that was with rook a6 as an example. With h4 as an example, rook d5, rook c7, this example, knight d2 check. This is more significant for white as a way of, that seems an easier conversion for white in this particular position. There's bigger prospects for white to win. King e2, king d4 has a knight c3 check threat. So actually we're just going to transpose. We have to do something here other than king e2. So we're back to either this rook a6 or this h4. So why is king e1 such an inaccuracy then? Well, okay, f6, we have h4, which is a further inaccuracy, it seems. So rook a6, it seems, might be better. Here, rook c6, rook b7, and get to that rook ending with bishop takes e4. This position, rook c5, f4, is going into a nice rook and pawn ending for white. This is probably the route white should have taken. But h4 immediately is not so clear. Rook d3, we have bishop d1. So if bishop takes e4, f takes, rook c5 check, king d6, rook h5. It's tricky now. King e6, let's take this example, rook f3, rook h7, rook f4. And here f5 breaks up white's pawns. It's going to be even. And yeah, so f takes is a good idea. Not king takes, because then there's rook e6 check. Rook takes f6 is a different story. But f takes, yeah, it does seem, it looks to be good to undouble the pawns. Basically, that seems to be a good recipe. Instead of bishop takes e4, bishop e2 is another way to at least keep the advantage. But it seems something is going wrong here for white after bishop d1. Yeah, f4 is a very interesting move indeed for black to be able to play f4. So here we have g takes f4. If h5, f takes g3, and there's a dangerous g2 resource here to factor in. So let's go with f takes g3, rook takes g3, h6. The rook gets behind the pawn. Tarrasch rule of Siegbert Tarrasch saying rooks belong behind passed pawns, either your own or the opponent. That should be even. So g takes f4 check is played, king takes f4, bishop c2, and now rook d5. Rook c4. If bishop takes e4, king takes, rook takes f6. This is just an even position. The pawns are too fragmented, black king too aggressive in that position. Yeah, that's why this is even. It's just too much activity for black. So rook c4, f5, rook b4, king f3, bishop d1 check, king g2, rook b3, rook e5, f4. We have now rook e7. If rook c5, that is a way of trying to lose. The rook needs to remain on this e file. This is one of the better squares as well, or e7 or e8, but rook e7 will do. If rook c5, then there's bishop f3 check, and then white actually gets a very significant advantage here. This endgame is a significant advantage for white, and the king's been cut off. That would be embarrassing for black. So the rook does need to keep support of the knight on e4 here. We have rook e3, and now rook h7, h5, knight f6, rook e5, knight takes h5, rook takes f5, knight g3, rook f8, rook b7, that's protected, that pawn, king f3. Now this is pretty drawish because rook and bishop versus rook should be a theoretical draw. In theory it should be a theoretical draw. So knight e4, we have bishop c2. If f7, then there's knight d6, and taking out, it's going to be a draw. So we have bishop c2, knight d6, rook d8, king e5, bishop b3, knight f7, rook d5 check, king takes f6, and it's just a drawing position. This is just a draw here. Rook d6, yeah, they could have agreed a draw. The knight just needs to eliminate the pawn. It's a draw. So the game carried on until this point. Draw agreed. Okay, so there's some interesting key moments here. It's a big game. It's a big kind of roller coaster watching it, actually. And yeah, it got quite a few spectators on this game. Yeah, the longer these games go, they gather more spectators. So it's a very interesting game overall. And I think some people might be disappointed because of the engine evaluations, but I think calculation is intimately linked with evaluation. You can have positions which, you might have the bishop here, a strong centre, but there might be one move, subtle move, which changes the whole valuation. So calculation is so intimately linked with the evaluation numbers, and it's so easy to get carried away with the Stockfish evaluation number. I think that's, for me, one of the big interest points of observing this match live, how people get a bit carried away as if these evaluations can be used by humans. Sometimes they can, but sometimes it's not the case. It's very difficult because you need to calculate all of what Stockfish calculated to be able to carry through that evaluation. There's an intimate link between calculation and the evaluation scores given. So yeah, anyway, interesting game, interesting opening. Hope you enjoyed this one, got some interesting points from it. Okay, so I'll take you to the final position. Again, yeah, pretty simplified final position. Yeah, if you want to check out my playlist, yeah, Kingscrusher TV /W_C 2024. And I do have chess courses at discount. And actually, it's a huge discount period. It's like 80% off on many courses. So I hope you do check out my courses page. There is a course on the London system which occurred in the previous game of this match, for example. There's other courses on fundamental chess skills which are useful in every game you play, like calculation and evaluation. That's why I mentioned that quite a bit, because I was intrigued from that perspective in this game. Yeah, there's the course on calculation, there's a course on tactics, there's a course on positional chess. Hope you check out my courses page. Okay, comments, questions, likes, shares, appreciated. And if you did get to this point in the video, just any words like hi, appreciated, or how interesting you found this game, or if you were convinced someone was going to win, whatever you'd like to comment, that'd be great. Helps the YouTube algorithm. Okay, thanks very much.